Greetings, tank fans. It is the 6th of February 2022. My name is John. This is the Totally Tanked podcast. I'm joined in the pod by Rob.
Hello, I'm Rob, and we're talking tanks today. What tank are we talking about, John?
We are the ZT15 or the VT5. It's the Chinese new light tank.
It's called the Type 15, and it's the Black Panther.
Yes, one of the Black Panthers.
One of the Black Panther. Will the real Black Panther please stand up, because the Korean K2 is also known as the Black Panther. So
quite a different tank.
Very different tanks.
Yeah. Now,
T'Challa versus Killmonger. Here we go. The battle for the Wakanda.
And
all the vibranium in the world.
I loved that this is the very first time that our game of Guess That Tank in the silhouette, no one got it.
Really?
Yeah. Someone guessed the Chinese Type 99, so they were close.
Ooh, that is like 50 tons heavier.
Yeah, it's a bigger tank, but I mean they do share some
similarities with silhouette. Yeah, you're right. They do.
But yeah, so this is the first time the peanut gallery has been confounded, and this is a tank that hasn't done anything yet, but as we're going to discuss, it has been built to do some stuff that
And a lot of other people are starting to think, having light tanks that can do some stuff, that's not a bad idea. I think we might have to build some tanks to do some stuff as well.
Yeah, light ones. Yeah. I would say that Canberra is currently a city under siege with huge anti-vax protesters marauding around in their four-wheel drives, beeping their horns. And obviously as the operators of the world's most famous pro-vaccine tank podcast, which I can say with great confidence, we feel a little nervous, but
they'll never find us in our bunker here.
Yeah, and also not to worry. As tank podcasters, we are not without means with which to defend ourselves if worst comes to worst.
I was about to say they've come to the one city in the world that they'd be pretty confident they're not going to catch COVID here.
Because
with 98.5%. Vaccination over the age of 5 or something like that?
Yeah, this is one of the most vaccinated cities in the world, and we do not like these people and their refusal to wear masks and their tooting of their horns of their four-wheel drives. At
least some of them are catching the tram out here.
Are they wearing their masks on the tram?
No.
Bad day for the red shirts. Our standards enforcers on our trams wear red shirts, so... Yes. Okay.
But what are we wearing, John?
You're wearing your Totally Tanked t-shirt.
I'm wearing my brand new Totally Tanked t-shirt, Matilda 2, old and slow all the way to the end, just like me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I've got to say, the focus in this t-shirt design was on the tank, and boy, that is a big looking Matilda on your chest.
That's a great looking tank, that Matilda 2.
Yeah.
And I got to say, when John pitched the idea of the selling t-shirts with tank slogans and tanks on them, I wasn't real sure about this idea, but as soon as the Matilda 2 with old and slow all the way to the end, I thought, that just resonates with me. That calls to me. So that was the catchphrase that caught me and said, I think this is a good idea. We can do this. And so that's the one I had to go for. So, yep.
Now we have sold 4 t-shirts so far. And 3 of them we bought. But that does mean... that there's someone out there, and I know it's the T34 shirt and the red one, and it should be with them by now actually. So if you are the owner of the other Totally Tanked t-shirt, do please send us an email with your picture. What's the email again, Rob?
I don't know.
Who are we?
Totally Tanked. Totes Tanked?
Yeah, Totes Tanked.
We'll fill that in later. We'll come back to you with that one after the...
Totestanked@gmail.com. Yeah.
Anyway, we're talking the Type 15 Black Panther Chinese light tank. 36 tons of fun and excitement. It's got... they've got built about 250 now for the army, but they've also built 20-something for their naval/marine forces. So they're getting them out there.
So is that the People's Liberation Army, Navy, Marines?
No, I think you have to drop the army out of there. It's People's Liberation Naval.
No, because the Chinese Navy is the People's Liberation Army, Navy.
Oh, there you go.
The plan.
Yes. Well, anyway,
you've got to have a plan, man.
It has got... What sort of guns have got it on it, John?
It's got basically, and I believe it's ammunition compatible, a British L7-105.
It pretty much is the L7-105. And
I love the idea that sometime in the 1940s, when the British cannon technicians were in their factory, in their overalls, smoking their cigarettes, making their cups of tea, that if you could go back in time and said, in 2022, the Chinese are going to be copying your cannon design, because that's how good it's going to be, I think they'd be pretty pleased.
Those guys, yes, with their knowledge of China, probably. Now, if you ask them nowadays, maybe not.
Anyway, I think it's kind of cool.
It is.
But there's a reason why they've gone with, what is admittedly one of the greatest cannon designs of the 20th century. For a light tank in 2022, we will discuss the Sprute with its 125mm cannon, but it makes sense to go a step down from the biggest when you're trying to build a light tank.
Because just weight and size of the rounds you can hold in your autoloader or anything else makes a big difference.
Yeah, just the weight of the vehicle, and the weight of the turret, everything flows from that.
And if you put on a 120 or 125, you're going to knock the tank over sideways, unless you really built for it.
Yeah, well, we've discussed in the Sheridan episode all the enormous problems they had with putting basically an MBT turret on a light tank.
Yeah.
What this is, though, as a light tank that is designed for a weird combination, but it'll make sense as we explain it, of high-altitude mountain warfare and amphibious landing warfare, is, in both cases, they've said, what does it need to defeat? And in the case of the high-altitude warfare, it's not much.
Mobility is what it needs to defeat, because at high altitude, big diesel engines need a lot more oxygen in them than a petrol engine, and to move around all the existing MBTs that go around in those areas in the Indian Tibetan plateau type thing, big diesel T72s, T90s, and their engines don't do as well in the low oxygen environment. And they said, right, we need to have mobility up at those altitudes and be able to go up bad roads, across small bridges and everything else, and be able to be effective in those areas, because at the moment they're Type 99s.
Yeah, yes. Chinese MBT is the T99.
Yeah, Type 99s. Too big, too heavy, and can't move around effectively at that altitude. So you need something that has the mobility.
Yeah,
is what you want.
Now, but to do with the gun selection comes down to it needs to be able to slot T72s, and if it's going to be used in an amphibious capacity for, say, the invasion of Taiwan, let's not beat around the bush. That is
Chinese Taipei, John.
Yeah.
As they're competing under at the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, but the Taiwanese have M60s, which will bring a little joy to the heart of our many ex-M60 driver listeners. But the 105 is entirely capable of wrecking an M60.
Yep. Well, so it's still armor.
It's still hulled, yeah.
Still hulled.
And this has modern ammunition. It's not using your 1950s vintage L7 ammo. So yeah, it's a careful selection. Admittedly, it limits them to fighting what is in the here and now. And as we know, tanks outlast the here and now they're designed in, and whether they'll regret not going for something bigger in the future is a different question.
The mountains are around for a long time, so they're not going anywhere.
You'll still need to fight high altitude.
The mobility is still a big issue, and you can have you can put the biggest gun you want on a 70-ton MBT, and you know what? It's not going to go through the mud of a tropical monsoonal area, and it's not going to operate at over 5,000 meters up on high plateaus.
And then there's just always the issue, anytime you talk about tanks, of bridging. Mm-hmm. And what bridges are available and what they can carry. And particularly, it's one thing to say you're in Holland and you need to cross a canal and you bring forward your bridging vehicle that has a 15-metre span.
30.
Well, okay, 30-metre span that will cross a 30-metre canal. It's another thing when you're looking at an abyss in the Himalayas. There is a rickety little bridge that trucks can get across, but you put your tank on that and it's gone. The Chieftain recently had a really fun description of a part of the Battle of the Bulge, and was describing how the Germans brought forward their Jagdpanther over the only bridge in the area across a major river, and it destroyed the bridge and totally blunted their own assault. Because the bridge just collapsed with the Yak Panther.
Yeah, too big, too heavy.
Yeah. And this is why we keep talking about bridging, because the logistics entailed are absolutely crucial to tank warfare. That and seeing first and shooting first. I would like to apologise and sort of not apologise. We've had a few people say, oh, Rob always says this and John always says that. And it's like...
It's our thing.
But also, you guys, these are people who've discovered the podcast, which is awesome, and we love you. And then they listen to all, this is episode 29, in the space of 2 weeks. And they're like, oh, you kind of repeat yourselves sometimes. It's like, yeah, but for us, we've recorded this over the span of what's coming up on 3 years.
And about 7 cases of beer.
Yeah. So I'm not going to apologise if occasionally we've told the same story twice or
5 times, 6 times.
Or made the same point a few times.
And we'll make the same jokes soon enough.
Oh, well, if you're lucky. Yeah, anyway, so that's part of it. But the bridging is super important, and if you can make a lighter tank, it can use more bridges that are being used by the communities in the places that you're trying to operate in. And that's really useful and really important. But, as we've also discussed, the compromises you need to make to what you would otherwise want in your tank are also huge, because all the things you want in a tank make it heavier and heavier and heavier until we're now pushing 80 tons.
At 36 tons, this is not a light tank. This is a heavy light tank. So it's got some protection. It's got a decent gun. It's got a lot of mobility. It's got a number of ERA packages, explosive reactive armour packages that they can put on it. That each of those, it starts out at 33 tons base, and then as you add
36 with the armour package.
Yeah.
And they're talking about an active protection system. So this is being discussed, but I don't think anyone's seen it deployed.
I've seen a passive one deployed.
Yeah, but I'm talking about active protection system. So this is a series of radars and big giant claymore mines, basically, or shotguns around the tank that'll...
anti-missile missiles. That basically, if your tank detects that a anti-tank missile is coming in to hit you, it will automatically fire off countermeasures in the form of a anti-missile to take out what's coming in to kill you.
Often it's... it varies from APS to APS, active protection system. Sometimes it's just literally ball bearings embedded in an explosive to fire out in a direction, but it does vary. And the other thing that certainly Western active protection systems like Trophy do is they will slew the tank's main gun to the point of origin, and if depending on the settings, fire the damn thing at where it came from even before the missiles arrived. Which particularly for handheld anti-tank weapons that rely on keeping the crosshairs on the tank can be extremely disruptive.
Because those anti-tank missiles can go fairly slowly, whereas your 120mm round going down range of 125mm round,
105 in this case,
can go a lot faster than
yeah.
Anyway, look, let's talk.
But nerves of steel as well.
Yeah. So it's got a 3-man crew, 3-person crew, I should say.
Autoloader based out of the Bustle, and the videos I've seen on YouTube, it looks very smooth. This autoloader.
Yeah. So it's not your traditional Russian carousel built into the floor autoloader. It's Western style in the Bustle, so it pulls around out, loads it in. Now, one thing we haven't seen. Now, there's not a whole lot of information about this tank available to the interwebs that we've been able to find.
Yeah, English language sources always suffer with these ones too.
Yeah. So we don't know what the rate of fire is. We can make some guesses, but we don't know.
Well,
we don't know.
I'd take a look at what the 105L7 does.
We don't know.
Autoloader makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we don't know what the elevation depression of the gun is.
But it does look like it's really good.
It has. They have shown that it has a cutout in top of the turret in order to let the gun depress more, which would be very useful in mountain warfare when you want to be sitting on top of a hill and of any sort of hill and be able to shoot down at the T-72s that might be coming towards you.
Yeah, and there's always an issue with tanks with autoloaders. If the gun has... The greater the traverse of the gun, the longer it's going to take to return it to a state where the autoloader can service it. But... Yeah.
That's still the time it's going to take for the loader to get the next round out, prepare it, and then whack it straight in the breech and then go. So,
I am totally on Team Autoloader.
Same.
I think keeping a loader around just because you want someone to cook dinner is not a valid tank design reason.
So the gun can fire HE, AFPDS,
AFPDS, yeah.
Yes, that's the one. Heat, and they can also fire an anti-tank guided missile down the barrel, which for a 105 rifled barrel is not a bad effort.
Now it's interesting here because normally, particularly the Soviet-inspired designs, they were fitted for not with this anti-tank missile that they never made a lot of. The Americans totally stuffed up the Shillelagh missile that was meant to go out the barrel. But I would also say if you tried to make the Shillelagh in 2022 with modern electronics instead of the electronics available in the 1950s, I think you'd get a much better weapon.
Having manual bloody input to say, I'm firing a missile rather than I'm firing a round.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so a lot of things have been overcome since that debacle of the Shillelagh missile. And if there's one thing Chinese are really good at, it's mass production. So I strongly suspect that in a Chinese barrel-launched anti-tank missile might actually make its way to real frontline units instead of the problem with the Russian ones. It's like, yeah, it could fire this thing, but does anyone actually have one? Has anyone been allowed to train with it?
And because they're much more expensive,
Yeah. And that changes a few things with the danger this tank presents because as it is, it's designed to slot a T-72, slot an M60. That's just with the cannon, and if it comes up against something tougher, if they've got a couple of
anything with proper composite armor as well as ERA, its regular rounds won't do.
They'll have to get lucky.
Yeah, they won't. Yeah, they won't. They have to be lucky. Whereas an anti-tank guided missile will take out anything with composite armor and. I
believe it does have a tandem warhead. They're saying as well for working its way through things. Yeah, and if they've got a lot of those, because also let's face it. As much as we all dream of Fulda Gap, most tanks don't spend most of their time fighting other tanks. They spend their time supporting the infantry, engaging pillboxes and bunkers, and shooting up lighter vehicles.
And at this stage of the game, what's happening up in the Ladakh Pass, the high altitude areas on the border, or the line of control between China and India, is... If you can show the other side that you've got a bigger stick, they're probably going to back off rather than make a confrontation happening.
Now, we should talk about the high altitude modifications. So aside from having a very good power to weight ratio with a 1,000 horsepower engine and a 33-ton tank, it does also... It does your head in reading the sources that are available for Chinese and Indian tanks, frankly. They come across much the same. They talk about their oxygen generator in this tank, and it's like, well, what exactly are you talking about? What I believe they're talking about is it's a supercharger that will compress more atmospheric oxygen into the engine for combustion.
Which means your engine will actually turn over rather than struggle to produce the horsepower you're expecting. Yeah,
and to give some sense of operating at these altitudes, diesel trains conk out in these high altitude environments, and that's one of the reasons why the Chinese and the Indians both still operate large fleets of steam trains, which can just suck more air in.
There you go. Didn't know that one.
Yeah. The Andes in South America similarly have problems with diesels not being able to operate at the heights they want them to. But so that I believe is the oxygen generator. I'm sure someone will correct me if we're wrong. But the Chinese sources are hard to work with for non-Chinese speakers. And also, I do really love the remotely operated weapon station on this thing.
Yeah, so it's got a heavy machine gun as well as a 40mm automatic grenade launcher as a remote-controlled add-on onto the top of the turret.
Which, for dealing with things that you don't want to waste a main gun round on, is a really nice combination of anti-material, anti-personnel.
And not having to stick your head out of the top of the turret to be able to shoot at it. So.
Yeah. So it's... I would say... Everything in the stated design of this tank is extremely well thought out and seems to make a lot of sense for what the Chinese wanted to do.
So, and look, it's fast. It's 7 k's an hour with a range of about 450, 470 k's.
That's without the external fuel drums,
And then
which
it's got
you can take.
Which has a couple of extra external fuel drums. It takes it out to about 700 k's. It can do 35 k's off road. Incline climb a 60-degree gradient climb, so it's just pretty damn good.
The 60 is enormous.
Yeah, I know. That's steeper than most stairs. All right, we're talking ladder up against the house type arrangement there.
Yeah, well, it's 2/3 of the way to straight up.
Yeah. So it does have aircon, which is useful in all sorts of ways, and NBCD protection.
Look, we've fought the fight over the years in this podcast, saying that air conditioning for crews in tanks should be standard.
One way or the other, use it, because it's going to make the crews going to stay effective longer.
Yeah.
It's only got 38 rounds in the autoloader for the autoloader.
Yep.
It's got now.
I think any tank that's fired 38 rounds from its main gun deserves to go home and.
Well, the question is it space or is it weight, or what is it that you limit the number of rounds in there?
Well, I mean, the autoloader automatically comes with constraints, particularly if you've packed it safely, and so it doesn't just blow up and kill everyone. I mean,
one way the Indians are getting over the fact of the weight limitations of getting up to the high altitudes is by saying, rather than taking all the rounds in the tank, we're just going to leave half them out there, and so that's saving you weight as you go up the hill. Yeah,
it does. Then you get to the problem when the enemy finds your ammunition caches before you can get to them.
Anyway,
and also hydropneumatic suspension.
So it can kneel,
which is super important for operating in mountains, for getting your elevation on your gun
and your gun depression. Yeah. So being able to look over the top of the hill from a hull down position. Mm-hmm. Now, it is air deployable. It is not.
You get two of them in their C-17 knockoff.
Yes, but it's not amphibious. It is. It will be deployed on beaches from landing craft, but it's not actually amphibious in and of itself. So that is a limitation that they've obviously decided to take on board and say we're not going to follow any, not going to make the limitations within the tank to say make it amphibious, because that does put constraints upon how you're building things.
Oh yeah.
Whereas in saying we're just going to make sure that if we can get it to dry land or wet land, once it's there, it's got low enough ground pressure that it can get on the beach and drive off at 70 k's an hour and do whatever it needs to do. So
as part of a combined concept of operations, I don't have a problem with that as a way to go about it, because purely amphibious vehicles, as the US Marine Corps' long history of horrible vehicles that barbecue their occupants.
With aluminium hulls and protection.
Because they have to be so light to swim and basically be boats before they roll up the beach. If you've got the hovercraft, the landing craft air cushions that can roar up the beach and disgorge the tanks, and if the tank's light enough to fit on that and let it operate, that's worthwhile and useful. Similarly Matilda, which is weirdly roughly in this weight range, was, even though it was a slow infantry tank and archaic in many ways, turned out in the Pacific War they could just fit it into a Higgins boat and undo the front ramp, and it would just trundle off and cause a lot of trouble. And similarly, that's what this is going to do. Air portability, it'll be interesting to see if China gets more into expeditionary warfare. I think with their interests in Africa, they are going to feel the need to deploy troops fast.
Do you think it's Africa or the South China Sea?
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. The South China Sea is more a straight naval play, whereas being able to fit it into a C-17 knockoff, I think it's the ZX-20 or something like that, but it looks like a C-17.
Yeah.
It really does. And I'm not one of these people like, the Chinese just steal other people's ideas, because I'm well aware that China is filing more patents per year than any other country on earth these days. And that's a huge shift from a few years ago when they definitely they didn't have an interest in intellectual property and were just stealing ideas. And now they've switched that around completely.
Just to be clear, that with the L7 gun that we are talking about, they
was bought under license.
Bought under license from the Austrians in the 80s via the British from the British, because the British Maggie Thatcher eventually recognised China as legitimate government and was really after some cash and hoping that they'd fight the Russians, and so decided to sell them the makings of the L7 gun.
Yeah, a smart country takes good parts of design from other places and makes its own designs where it needs them.
That's
so
what the Japanese do. Anyway, but for the China is also now the biggest producer of the ammo for the L7 gun, L7 105 gun in the world. So just bear that in mind. Say if you want rounds for your 105 mil gun, that's where they come from.
So, look, everything in my house is made in China. I don't see why the tank ammunition should be different. It's clever. It's light. I mean, there is a version of the VT5 made for export, which Bangladesh has bought.
Now there are some questions as to. Okay, Bangladesh, yes, is a highly wet country with lots of delta and probably wants something with a high mobility. But you've got to be saying to themselves, is there any other reasons why they're buying this light modern third generation modern light tank?
It's designed to kill Indian tanks.
Yeah, but
and it's light enough to use the bridges that the Bangladeshis have, because yes, an amphibious tank has some advantages in a highly riverine landscape in that it can just swim across things. But as we've discussed, that comes with enormous disadvantages, and it can't have any real armour. I would say that the Type 15 is close to not having real armour. I mean, it's
good. It doesn't have composite. It does have a steel hull, which I'm assuming is made from Australian iron ore.
Yeah, well, probably.
And then with the ERA packages. So basically, you can take
ERA packages and possibly the active protection system as well. Yeah.
It won't take an MBT round, like a full on 120 Rheinmetall or anything else like that, or a 125. But anything less than that, I think it has protection. It has enough protection on it that it'll be able to survive pretty much anything else.
Yeah, it's a fine balancing act until we actually see it in service, and let's hope we never do.
No, exactly.
But until we actually see it in service, it'll be hard to say if how these compromises have panned out.
Having said it's been exported to the Bangladeshis, it is being touted as being low cost for export markets who cannot afford an MBT. But I haven't been able to find out how much it actually costs. That's one of the things I've been looking for, and I say, what did the Bangladeshis pay for it? But there's nothing that I could find with my 5 minutes of looking online that came up saying what it was and how much it cost for them. And they have been delivered at this stage, I believe.
I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page.
No, it doesn't list any cost.
No price. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I say, it probably is cheaper than an MBT, but I don't know by how much. I mean, how many other tanks could you have bought for this?
Now the designer and manufacturer is Norinco, which literally just stands for Northern Industrial Company, which is a state-owned...
Okay, you'd want to be a state-owned company if you're building tanks.
Tanks for the Chinese government. It doesn't hurt. But I guess my point is simply that the economics get extremely hazy when it's a state-owned company making a thing for the state.
But you would have to be... There should be somewhere in the Bangladeshi procurement process of saying, we paid X amount of dollars for these tanks.
Yeah.
And that's more what I was looking for, and I couldn't find that anywhere.
Yeah.
As I said, I didn't look terribly hard.
No, tank pricing and tank deal pricing is always extremely complex, because you've got the issue of, does that deal include parts? Does that deal include simulators? How much training in your country are you providing as part of the deal? Because slots in those
again, all
schools,
those things should be available for through a democratic government, is what Bangladesh is.
Yeah.
So whereas China, they're not going to tell us how much it costs, but the others might.
Yeah.
That's why I was looking at it saying, is it actually cheaper? I'm assuming it is, because it is much smaller and everything else, but we don't know.
I think it's definitely worth mentioning that this tank does have a full hunter-killer setup for the commander and the gunner.
Oh yeah, the electronics and the everything else inside it is pretty. It is third generation. It is third generation tank design.
Now, what that means for listeners who are new to the show is that the commander can find targets, designate the targets, and then the gunner, when he's finished shooting at the last target, has all the information to automatically get onto the next target that the commander's designated. And it's a mark of proper third generation tanks. And when we're talking tank generations, fourth generation tanks are appearing, but third generation light tanks are still pretty special.
Well, there aren't any besides this one.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there won't be more very soon.
Yeah, and everyone keeps saying, what about the Sprute? What about the Sprute? And I keep being like, it's not real yet.
And it's not a light tank. It is a big gun, that is a big mobile gun. Is what it is.
Yeah, well, it's got no armor whatsoever, and maybe it will do everything it's supposed to do, but I suspect it's going to suffer from all the limitations and all the design compromises of everyone's light tank, the American Sheridan or the this Chinese design. When you're building a light tank, you have to leave things out that you would really like to put in.
Yeah, as you were saying, it's got a good fire control system and thermal imaging for the gunner and the commander. It's got an integrated communication system, so it can work in with all the other packages that of all the rest of the environment around it, whether it's eyes in the sky or boots on the ground. It can talk to all those people and get target information from them and have it designated. So it's got the smarts to be able to put rounds where they need to be put and know where the enemy is. So it's not like it is a modern tank. It just happens to have less. Doesn't have composite armor. It has a steel hull. It doesn't have. It's only got a 105mm gun. It doesn't have the big 120 Rheinmetals or the 125 Russian guns. So.
But when, we're going to stress this again, 33 tons, meaning you can fit 2 in the plane instead of 1 in the plane, or 2 in the landing craft instead of 1 in the landing craft, or it's complete, let's the capacity to operate at high altitudes, which most diesel engines don't have, full stop.
Well, I was about to say there are a few countries in the world that have the requirement to operate at that, but China and India are those, and Pakistan are 2 of those, and there's probably a couple others on those borders there. But realistically, those are the 2 that need it, because they're in confrontation with each other, and they want to be able to say, yes, this is where the line on the map should have been drawn.
And disputing that line on the map, but it's a beautiful piece of design for the Chinese requirements, and obviously it'd be nice if all the world's countries actually came to the tank biathlon. We were watching Tank Biathlon on YouTube before we started this, and we could actually get some sense without needing to have a war of whose tanks are better. But
the other one was the Chinese propaganda machine did have a lovely little video of a female tank crews driving around these things at high speed, throwing down rounds down range, and it just made me think of Girls on Panzer, which is Japanese anime with the schoolgirls from different countries driving their different countries' tanks around for basically a tank biathlon type activity. And it really was. I thought to myself, yeah, that'd be fun.
Does it take much to turn your mind to Girls in Panzer?
Sometimes.
Sure.
I haven't actually watched all that much of it. It's just I like the idea. I like the idea of it. Is what it is.
I like knowing it's out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I did follow Girls in Panzer on Facebook a while ago, but they've gone really quiet lately. But it's probably just as well.
All right, we're going to take a break now and come back with
beer review.
You'll never guess what it is.
This ain't no grog or ale. 1 pint down, you'll be swinging in the gale. 5 pints, buddy, you'll be shaking in your shoes.
So, Rob, tell us what beer you've got us.
I got a Chinese beer, John.
Hey!
Tsingtao.
Hang on a sec. Let me just...
There we go.
There we go.
Water, malt, rice, and hops.
Yeah, rice is obviously not in the German purity laws, but is used quite frequently in brewing to just add a little bit extra sugar.
Really? Okay.
The fermentables, yeah.
Right,
So it gives you fermentables without adding a lot of other flavours, which, depending on what your flavours are doing, is fine. For a lager, like I said, German purity laws would tell you it's absolutely verboten, but those are mostly just a 17th century way to figure out tax before you could chemically assay beer. Anyway, it is beautiful nose, lovely lager nose, which is really, literally
very pale colour.
very pale. I spent about 2 months travelling through China in the 90s, which is really dating me as a very old man now. And I'm going to tell a little story. So I was travelling 4th class down the Yangtze River on a ferry, and this might seem like a bad idea. And I had some Swedish friends who happened to be on the same ferry. When I say friends, I'd met them in China, and we happened to be on the same ferry. And we have actually stayed really good friends since, so that was nice. They were in first class, and they were having a miserable time up in first class because they couldn't open the windows. And it was air conditioned, but it was all interior corridors, and they were just sort of looking out the window. And they came down to find me in 4th class, and I had my feet dangling in the river because you've got literally inches of freeboard on these river ferries. And I had a Tsingtao beer that I'd paid a whole $1 for, and it was like an 800 ml, so nearly a litre, a fifth of a gallon. Long neck.
40 ounce.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. Big beer bottle. So I've got my feet dangling in the river. Sitting on a chair. I've got various Chinese people coming to shout at me about things I need to know about from time to time. And these Swedes who paid 10 times the price to be in first class looked at the setup I had down there, and like every day they were down there in 4th class with their feet in the river, drinking beer. And they did invite me up to first class. I saw what it looked like. And for sleeping at night, where I was literally there were 8 of us bunking in this cabin. And I tried to turn the light off on the first night, and all these Chinese people started shouting at me and going, "Ee!" And what they were trying to say was, if we turn the lights off, the rats will get to us. So we kept the lights on to
keep the rats away.
To deter the rats.
Like what we do here in Australia to keep the huntsmen away.
Yeah. So Tsingtao was one of the beers that was good, and lots of other Chinese beers at the time would give you fearful hangovers. Tsingtao wouldn't. But so I was paying $1 for a big long neck of Tsingtao, and that was thoroughly enjoyable. And then everyone on the boat was just throwing their garbage into the river. Like literally, yeah. The porters would clean up the trash cans and just dump them into the river. So that was the style of the time, and I'm not a huge fan of that, but that was the nature of things. Anyway, so I was finishing my Tsingtaos and just tossing the bottles into the river, and every time I did it, the locals will go. I thought, I'm doing something wrong. And then I discovered they had a version of container deposit scheme. So that all I had to do was collect 8 Tsingtao bottles, and I could take it straight back to the place I was buying them from on the boat, and they would give me another bottle. Full of beer for 8 empties.
Buy 8, get 1 free.
Yeah, essentially, as long as you take the bottle back.
Did you have your little punch card ready for it?
Yeah, not quite that, but yeah. Anyway, so that was one of my strong memories of Tsingtao. So they weren't gasping that I was littering their river, because they didn't care about that. Sadly.
But you did tell me the story about how you pointed out to the porters one day that the bins were full and overflowing, and they looked at you and said, "Oh, okay," and just took up the bin and threw it in the river.
Yeah. But they were gasping that I was throwing
an eighth of a beer away.
Well, basically a whole yuan, because it was 8 yuan for a beer, which is essentially $1 at the time. I haven't checked on the exchange rates recently.
It's 6 these days or something.
Anyhow. It was a wonderful time to be alive. I did lose a really good pair of sunglasses in the river looking over the railing. And the chief engineer, who spoke no English, used to periodically, because his cabin was one door down from our 4th class cabin, he'd run and find some poor Chinese person who spoke English and shout at them, and they had to come and tell me things I needed to know. Like, this bridge is the fourth biggest suspension bridge in the world, or you need to go look at that temple while we're in this port. It's, anyway, it was good stuff. And the Swedes in their first class were insanely jealous that I was having all these interactions. And,
having experience rather than just travelling.
Yeah, and otherwise just dangling my feet in the river, drinking beer and watching China go past, because the river trade is astonishing what goes past on barges. But yeah. Anywho, that's a long digression. Tsingtao, now it's from Tianjin in northern coastal China. It was originally the Germans set up the brewing there when they had a colonial concession there.
Enclave.
Yeah.
Prior to the Boxer rebellions, and when they were getting in with basically trying to establish themselves as a colonial power.
Yeah, and it was actually a joint Japanese-British force that captured Tianjin in the First World War, and took it off the Germans. But the brewing facility stayed in business, and the Chinese have adopted it as their model since. So what you've got is let's talk about the beer for a minute. What you've got is a lager that is ideally suited for hot, humid days. Not too much fizz, but
no, it's quite. It pours out with a decent head, and then that disappears pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't lace the glass like other beers might, but it does. I mean, I'm halfway through this one, and it's still got a little bit of foam on top, so it's not flat by any means, but it's just a slightly lower fizz, and on any sort of day with any sort of heat and humidity, I would strongly recommend it if you're after a beer, particularly just to show that you're a more interesting cosmopolitan person. Yeah, no, Tsingtao, it's solid as global lagers go. We've talked about this before.
It is a global lager, and look, $15 for a 6-pack, not a bad deal.
It's a really good price, yeah. I would say, I mean, China has an exploding brewing scene going on right now. Just like everywhere in the world, their brewing scenes are exploding, and there's lots of exciting stuff happening with, particularly the hops coming out of Oregon, getting used in exciting and different ways. And this is in no way representative of all that Chinese craft beer scene that is happening. It's just a lager, which is what 80% of people drink all the time. And I like it as a lager. It's good.
Established 1903, so that would have been just after the Boxer Rebellion. So
yep.
I think. Is that about right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there you go. So that's when the Germans must have made their name as part of the putting down the rebellions. And
that would have been how they got the concession.
Yeah. How they got the enclave built for them. There you go.
Okay, so that's the beer. If you haven't had it, I strongly...
A couple of temple dogs sitting outside a temple on the label.
I always think they're lions, but yeah, I know
they're temple dogs. They do look a lot like lions.
Controversial.
Yes. They look a lot like lions. They're called temple dogs.
Yes,
okay.
In English. Yeah. Cool. So
back to tanks.
We found one.
Did we?
Yeah, yes. Local one.
Yes, we found a tank. There was a tank just lying around on the street in Canberra.
Yeah.
It made headlines for at least a week. And so John went out and had a look at it.
I did, and it's a funny thing because when it started spreading on social media, this tank was parked in... There's a suburb in Canberra called O'Malley, which is where...
The embassies are.
The embassies that didn't already have embassies from the 1950s, which they're all in Deakin and Yarralumla. And O'Malley is for the new countries. So literally the street this tank's parked on's got the Pakistani and the Vietnamese ambassadors' residences.
So when we say new, is that less than 1950, after 1950 type thing?
Yeah, I mean, O'Malley was built in the 80s, as I recall. And it's unusual for Canberra in that it's hilly and it's got these big mansions built into the hillsides.
A lot of brick.
Yeah, a lot of brick. Anyway, it was spreading around on social media that there was a tank parked on the side of the road in O'Malley. And running a tank podcast in this town and having worked as a journalist, a lot of journalists were messaging me saying, "What's this tank? What is this tank?" And it did my head in to look at. Because it just kept... you do your little tricks for identifying tanks, which is, big one is number of road wheels, but what features are in the silhouette, and everything about this thing was wrong. It looked like a tank, but everything was wrong. And then what it turned out, what I literally said to one of the journalists was asking was like, "Look, it's not a Stug, but it looks like a Stug.
Yeah, it looks like a Stug 3.
Yeah, but it definitely isn't because the number of road wheels is wrong. And then friend of the show Cornelius got in touch with the owner and arranged for a trip to go have a chat to him and a look at his tank parked on the side of the road in O'Malley, and that was lovely. And we're going to play some audio of talking to the tank owner in a second. But so it doesn't have the side skirts on, and when it's just parked and you're looking at one photo from a distance, you can't tell even if it's got a proper traversing turret or not, which was part of why I went into a weird sort of meltdown with this not a tank. So it's a British infantry fighting vehicle that's been modified to look like a tank, a Stug, and with a totally different engine put in, but the original track's still there. And then the Australian Museum of Armour and Artillery in Cairns, which is up far north of here in Queensland, had it as part of their display as a Stug, and then they got a real Stug. So then they
expanding, yes.
Yeah, so then they put this on the market, and our friend David in O'Malley, who's a collector of German militaria, Rob.
Not saying anything.
Yeah. Anyway, he bought it for $60,000.
Tony's dad is also a collector of German militaria,
Yeah.
and I know him, and he's not.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so and then he paid $6,000 for it to be shipped down here, and now he's hoping for someone with some land near Canberra to let his tank roam free.
Rather than just having it sitting on the side of the road in O'Malley, because it's not allowed to drive anywhere in Canberra, because we have certain rules about tracked armoured vehicles on the roads if you're not part of the military.
If you don't have freedom of the city.
Yeah.
But also, even by his own admission, it just doesn't have all the things like turning indicators.
Turn signals on a Land Raider.
Yeah. Although I believe flags are still a legal substitute, so we just need someone to sit on the back and wave the flags when they're... I reckon that might be a solution for him. But,
no, that's a good point.
Anywho, let's just play my little audio now of our friend with his tank. So I'm here in Canberra's southern suburb of O'Malley, and with David. Say hello to the listeners, please, David.
Hello, listeners.
And we are looking at what looks a lot like a Stug 3 parked on a suburban street.
It's pretty close.
It's
actually
very close, yeah.
a British armoured personnel carrier, FE432, that's been redone to look like a Stug.
Okay, and can you talk me through how it came to be here?
What happened is I had a friend who knew someone at the Cairns Tank Museum.
Excellent.
And was told that they were getting an original Stug.
Yep.
And as a result, they didn't need their replica anymore.
Gotcha.
Right, and so I contacted the owner.
Yep.
And we had a discussion, agreed on a price, and it ended up here.
Now, you are a collector of other militaria.
Yes, yeah, German army uniforms, equipment, all that sort of thing.
But this is a big step up.
Yes, it definitely is. Big in a number of ways, yes.
And you've been all over a lot of local media. I mean, it just happens that we run a tank podcast throughout the world, and we're in the same town, so everyone wanted to know what was going on. You've had a lot of contact with the media about it. Everyone wants to know.
Yes, I have. Surprisingly, not television, but the radio, yes, newspapers and online.
Yep. Right, okay, that's fantastic. And what are you going to do with it? Is it going to sit here on the suburban street, or?
No, whilst it's a great lawn ornament, I really need somewhere where it can run free.
Sure.
Because it drives.
Yep.
So my plan is to put it on a property.
Yep.
Set up a tank track.
Yep.
And run it at regular intervals, so people will have the chance to actually come and play commander in a Stug.
I imagine it'd be a big hit at school fetes as well.
The big trouble is getting it there.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
because you need a truck.
Gotta put it on a truck.
Yeah, because it has no indicators, no turn signals.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess, Are you willing to talk about the price?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what does it set you back? Because this is the dream for all our listeners, is to have their own tank. What did this one cost you?
Well, the purchase price was $60,000.
Yeah, right.
And the transport cost was about another $6,000.
6. Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to say 60. Okay.
No.
Yeah, but so it's not insignificant to put it on a truck and have it driven somewhere. So.
No, that's right. In fact, it spent 6 months on the border of Queensland and New South Wales.
Oh, that would have been so frustrating.
Yeah, well, not much I could do about that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Wow. Did you have to pay for storage on the border?
No. Fortunately, the transport company just parked in their lot. They were quite happy.
That was good of them. They were probably getting selfies with it. Fantastic. Well, is there anything you want to tell the listeners about getting into tank ownership that they might not have thought of?
Well, you have to be a mechanic. You have to know a lot about tanks to get into in armoured vehicles.
Yeah, right.
Because there's a hell of a lot of maintenance involved.
Yeah, right. And you can't just take it to the shop.
No, that's right. You can't ring up a local mechanic and say, I need my track changed.
Yeah, right. I mean, track tensioning, are you doing that yourself? Because that's normally a biggish job.
It is a biggish job. I've got to get all the right tools to do it.
Yeah, right.
Because I've only just got the tank, and at the moment it's pretty much sitting still until I can get everything I need to do what I need to do.
Yeah, because you don't want to break track on your own with something like this. No. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for letting us play with your tank.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it has somewhere to run.
Yeah.
And it's available, when I open it up for people to actually come for a ride in it.
Sure. Okay. And if any of our listeners know of somewhere to park a tank near Canberra, get in touch and we'll let you know.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Rob, what have you learned?
The rumbling of the Stug 3 is a lovely sound.
It's not a Stug 3 engine.
I know, but it puts me in mind of a heavy diesel engine rumbling away, and you can feel the power of the gun ready to go.
Yeah, it was interesting. The interior, it doesn't have the same effort to make it look like a lifelike one. So it was all black, and I was quite surprised they hadn't painted it white, given that that's just a choice of paint colour. And the gun was elevated by means of a car jack. And when I say gun, it's just a tube, you know.
bit of aluminium piping.
I don't know if it's aluminium or not, but I should have asked. Yeah.
PVC.
Anywho, it was very nice of David to let us play with his tank and to open up the hatches and start the engine, which got him in trouble with his partner. Anyway, so that was a fascinating little look into the world of tank ownership. And I think a really big point that he made that I'd never really thought of was that you have a mechanical device that is prone to breakdown. And
and not new.
Yeah, and not new, and there is you can't just call up a mechanic like you can when your car's stuffed. And a lot
of tow truck companies will say, well, how much does it weigh?
Yeah.
16 tons? No. No, can't help you there.
Yeah, so things to consider with our dream of tank ownership, although we're going to need to sell a lot more t-shirts to...
buy that universal carrier?
Yeah. We're only aiming at a carrier, the smallest thing you could ever call a tank. So come on, folks. Anywho.
Type 15s, other things.
Yes. Shall we talk about the Ukraine?
I think I'll go stick with the, it leads into the Ukraine, I guess.
Okay.
With things happening with the Type 15. Because of the conflict on the line of control on the Chinese-Indian border and the movement of the Type 15s into that area where the T70s and T90s, T72s and T90s aren't operating effectively. The Indians are now looking to buy the Russian S2S25 Sprut SDM-1 as a countermeasure to the Type 15s.
Now, I've got to say, when we did the Sheridan episode and I said that no one has got the capabilities of the Sheridan since, a lot of people went, what about the Sprut? What about the Sprut? And as I will say when people talk about the Russian Armata tank, it's not in production. It's a paper set of capabilities, and it's not real. And you've got to compare real things with a bunch of things you'd like to happen in a design, because reality is about the difference between those things.
Yeah, and when we say production, we mean on the line with the battalions who are actually operating these things, rather than in production and saying, oh, we have a couple of these things we drive around for propaganda.
Yeah, 10 prototypes does not make a produced
Whereas
tank.
the Type 15, they've got 250 of these things with the battalions on the line. So, but the Indians are looking to buy the Sprut as a counter to the Type 15. The Sprut is a 18-ton, basically 125mm gun with an aluminium hull, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so it's a full, big main battle tank gun on a light chassis that can keep out 50 cal and not much more.
Whereas the Type 15 is designed to keep out anything less than a 120mm gun. RPG 7s, anything that's not decent or modern.
And I'm going to say, with the number of infantry fighting vehicles...
Yeah, anything that's not APF SDS ammo, basically.
But with the number of infantry fighting vehicles that have got 20, 30mm autocannons in them, that's a real threat you need to be considering with your fighting vehicle, and the Chinese Type 15 is not going to be troubled overly by those guns, whereas the Sprut is going to go straight through them.
Yeah. So the Sprut, however you want to pronounce it, I'm going to Australianise it and call it a Sprut. It is amphibious, and they've even shown videos of it firing on the move while swimming down a river, so I thought it was pretty cool. And then I saw it was airdroppable, and then I heard it was airdroppable with the crew inside. And
which is something you do only if you don't really care about the lives of your crew.
And that brought to mind...
You're just one parachute not opening away from a mess.
That brought to mind... the answer I should have provided, the question of a few podcasts ago of the best depiction of a tank in a movie, and I totally forgot about it. And I should have stayed true to it, which was the A-Team movie with Liam Neeson and Bradley Cooper, Sharlto Copley, and Rampage Jackson, having a M8 Buford tank, which is an experimental light tank the Americans brought out to replace the Sheridan, but didn't put into production. So they made a bunch of experimental prototypes.
Look, I've got to say, as a digression, what sort of crippling debt must Liam Neeson have to do all these terrible movies?
Have you seen the movies that Bruce Willis is doing these days? He's just doing everything and saying, yep, just give me the money.
But Demi Moore really cleaned Bruce out.
I think he's just doing it for the love of it. Anyway, I'm just
saying, Liam Neeson does a lot of really terrible movies. For someone who
he's typecast now. He can only do those movies. Anyway, come on, let's move on.
Let's
go back.
Let's
go back to Everson.
Okay, yes, the tanks...
tank scene in the A-Team was a great depiction of a tank. It was, and I think it was what Bradley Cooper, his role is Rocket Raccoon in the Guardians of the Galaxy.
It was the same character.
It was the same character. It was awesome.
So, right. And I would also say
but it does make me put in mind, could the Sprut be firing the gun while it's parachuting down? How's that for an idea?
Anyone can fire a gun. The question is, can they hit anything? And the A-Team, at least, there was that beautiful moment where the observing woman rolls her eyes as they're trying to fly the tank. So they were firing the gun to push it across, so they landed in a lake, which was lucky that there just happened to be a big lake.
And it was Germany. There's lots of big lakes, or Switzerland, or wherever the hell they were. But the point being is that I did then watch a video of some physicists, mathematicians doing the calculations as could the tank survive, and they said yes, they would hit with about 3 Gs of force, and so that is a survivable hit. I mean, they took a lot of...
I would say it's survivable if everyone's sitting in the correct chair with their seatbelts on. If you watch the movie, they were not properly braced.
They weren't showing those bits. But the other part they said is that the movie producers had made an effort to show that it was a hybrid version of the M8 Buford, which does have an electric engine. So when they did hit the bottom of the lake in wherever they were on the borders of Germany and Switzerland, wherever, it could actually start the engine and then drive out. So
yeah,
I like that. So they said, yep. There is some plausible.
It's plausible.
It's plausible. Yeah. It's not. I wouldn't want to. If Jamie and Adam.
No one
were
would
still
choose to have their aircraft shot out around them and plummet on a loading pallet in a tank from 30,000 feet.
I bet if Jamie and Adam were still doing MythBusters, they'd love to do this.
Oh, it would be a big budget to test that one. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a digression. But it brings into mind the Americans are now looking to build a light tank, but they're calling, of course, they can't call it a tank. They're calling it a mobile protected firepower. So, like,
I'm surprised it's not a motor gun carriage of some sort. But,
that's what the project is to build 500 mobile protected firepowers for their airborne divisions, so that they can parachute them in with or fly them in with the 82nd Airborne and so forth.
Now, one day when we've run out of tracked vehicles to talk about, we will have to tackle the debacle of the Stryker family of
but
vehicles.
we won't. Not today.
But basically, having a huge gun on an 8-wheeled vehicle has turned out to be a bad idea in that it keeps tipping over.
Yes, but look. So the Type 15 is the first modern light tank out there, essentially. Right, from the big
yes,
big
Sprute
producers.
fans, it's coming. We know.
Yeah, and the Sprute isn't a light tank. It is basically it's a tank destroyer that happens to be on it with a turret. It's not a. They don't even designate it as a tank. They say it's a. I can't remember whatever.
I mean, it's a tracked armored vehicle. It's a tank.
Yeah, but its role is to be a tank destroyer.
I have my doubts about trying to fire while river assaulting, which is, I mean, fundamentally, when you've got a floating tank, it means it hasn't got enough armour. Because the way you can tell it's got enough armour is if it sinks.
Yeah, it's an aluminium hull. The Sprute is an aluminium hull with only protection against small arms. It won't even take a heavy machine gun.
You've got to have a real...
It won't take a heavy machine gun hit. It'll only take 7.62 and 5.56.
You wouldn't want to have a mortgage and young children to be in the crew of a Sprute.
No.
Because you're a big target. Everyone wants to knock out the 125mm gun on the battlefield, and you don't have a lot of protection.
Now, the other point with these, they're not being made for high altitude because Russia and the US aren't designed.
Where's all the water? It's down low.
Yeah, aren't looking at high altitude fighting but the Sprute is, because it is so light. It's only 18 tons. Has a lot more mobility than the T-72s and the T-90s that the Indians are putting into those areas anyway. Yeah,
I would say, though, that even at sea level, the Sprute has significantly lower power to weight than the Type 15.
Yes.
The Type 15... I mean, the Type 15's 40mm grenade launcher could wreck a Sprute.
Yes.
Even before they bring the main gun to bear, even before they think about loading a anti-tank missile into it. Given a choice of which, unless the one thing that the Sprute can do is assault across rivers.
Yep.
That's its party trick. And boy, are we going to talk about assaulting across rivers, later in this episode. Because that's an important thing for Russians. I think the Indians can no doubt find a use for a light tank with a big gun because they too have many rivers. I wouldn't want to be taking a Sprute to war against the Chinese Type 15. I think that's asking for...
Well, you might want to be defending your own positions with that and making sure you can get the... If you're defending and you can get the firepower to where you want it to be, it's probably a big thing. Because the other thing with fighting in altitude, no helicopters. You can't just... get a chopper in to lift up your tanks and or your artillery, which is your main what you want to use for moving around your artillery is your helicopters. At 5,000 metres, you're not doing much of that. It's there's not enough air under the blades to be able to pull these things up.
Jet turbines don't like high altitude.
Yeah, which makes a huge difference as to the tank warfare up there. Because if it was tank warfare, you've no longer got the threat of attack helicopters coming over the hills and saying, anyway, the Ride of the Valkyries bloody throwing missiles down at you or anything else like that. What I haven't looked at is what the ceiling height, operating ceiling height of drones are for those sort of things. I don't know what sort of drones can operate at those sort of altitudes and how much air they need to be able to operate effectively as a tank destroyer and or reconnaissance.
Yeah, the bigger ones would be okay. It's an unfortunate acronym, but the MAIL drones, for medium altitude, long endurance, which if you think the Reaper's kind of in that category, they'd certainly be lower than they would be in other battlefields, but they could definitely operate in around those spaces. I think I'm pretty sure they go up to 30,000 feet. But using drones with all the latency issues and the jamming issues in an active anti-tank role would be interesting. And then you've got all the loitering munitions that are starting to proliferate, and I don't know.
And it's not just getting to the 5,000 metres. It's a case of once you're there, if you want to go from one valley to the next, you've got to go over a 6,000 metres
higher. Yeah,
another 1,000 metres or so higher mountain to go from one area to the next. So
often more than that. But yeah.
So it's not these things creating the environment is creating issues that haven't been had to be dealt with by a lot of other peoples in a lot of other conflict areas, and suddenly having people who can just walk up there because you can't get your trains, you don't have the roads, you don't have the bridges to be able to get anything else. So if you can get people on pack animals to go there and have enough more people than the other guy, then that's can be a determining factor as to what the conflict is all about.
Yeah, and it's, again, this is what I like about this design. Instead of saying, we want the biggest gun, they said, what gun do we need to keep the weight and the size of the whole thing down? Which is clever. I'm always reminded, when you're talking about design perfection, at sea, the British going from the Iron Duke class to the Queen Elizabeths, and the Queen Elizabeths were pretty much battleship perfection, said, you know what, we're going to take some turrets off this thing. So they went from a 5-turret design to a 4-turret design because it was more important to hit what you were shooting at. Anyway, and I think going back to the L7 design is a similarly inspired thing of saying we know this is a very good gun.
Take it T-72s quite happily.
Yeah.
Anything with a steel hull, it'll go straight. Yeah. It'll go through and wreck that up.
Which is particularly Taiwan. Hello.
Or so it will struggle. And anything with a composite hull, armor, that's where you use your anti-tank guided missiles. Now the other thing is, we've discussed it before. Is while everybody looks at it from the idea of it's built for this high altitude deployment. Where else could it be deployed, John? Wet season, tropical coastlines. Jane's Defence magazine, or one of their articles, mentions China's Southern Gate. And now I couldn't actually find a definition of what China's Southern Gate was, but I'm assuming it's like through Myanmar and Laos. The 75th Army Group down there has also been given Type 15s to work into wetter and more jungly type environments, I guess. So
yeah, right. I mean, that's interesting because I have actually crossed the land border between China and Vietnam, and I can tell you, there's a lot of tanks dug into the hillsides on both sides because they have fought a war in certainly our lifetimes, and it's riverine, hilly country. It's not particularly high altitude, but it's very up and down.
But again, areas that it's built for, they've been deployed for areas where 60 ton type 99s may not fare as well.
Well, it's the fun thing, isn't it? That if you're looking to defend, then you can build the road network in your own country to support the weight of the vehicle you want to use, and then you want to be careful about having some redundancy and not relying on any particular key arterial, but you can build what you need. When you're looking to assault into new territory, you've got to have something that works within the weight of the bridges that your enemy has, and they will. It's one of the reasons why the Indians don't build more bridges and roads up to the top of the Tibetan Plateau, is they don't want to make it easier for the Chinese to invade, because the other side can use that stuff too.
Think of how many Arjuns they could get up there, John.
None. That's the number of Arjuns they could get up there. The Arjun is happiest running at sea level sand dunes. Not even that
Golf
happy
course.
with sand dunes.
Golf courses, that's where you want to...
That's where your Arjun
When
shine.
I was running around through the bush, and throwing myself on this rocky, hard ground, I thought to myself, one day I'd like to do an assault along a golf course, and that would be the best day.
I've got to say, I went to the Fuji Rock Festival in Japan over 10 years ago now, and the camping there was on a golf course. And I have never slept as comfortably as I slept in my tent, in my blow-up mattress on a golf course. It was lovely. So you're right, yeah, golf courses are where you want to do your fighting.
Just saved the knees so much trouble.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to take a quick break and then come back with more recent discussions about something happening in between two countries beside Poland, John?
Near Poland.
Near Poland, yeah.
All right, your final thoughts on this tank, Rob?
Look, it's, as I was saying before, it's the first third-generation light tank that's been deployed, and it's going to force a lot of other people to think about how they're deploying tanks and what their requirements are. So it's a good little tank for what it wants to do. I wouldn't want to be facing one at high altitude without a tank, without an MBT around me, and preferably a third generation tank myself.
And particularly if it gets the APS, then to the active protection system, then infantry with anti-tank weapons aren't going to have a lot of options.
No, because as soon as that 105 swivels around to start facing you and fires around down range while you're still trying to guide your anti-tank guided missile in from 5k's out, you're in a bit of strife, I reckon.
Yeah, or the APS just disrupting the incoming missile, which, yes, everyone says, oh, but you just saturate it. You just arrange for 5 people to all fire their rocket-propelled grenade at the same time, and it's like, that's really hard. That's really hard to organise, is that kind of saturation ambush. Not saying it's impossible, just saying you won't be able to do it every time you want to do it.
And it's a lot easier to get one person into position than with that sort of stuff.
Oh, and all firing at the same time?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. So the Chinese have got a bit of a bit of a march on everybody else with this design, and we'll see what happens with the new, what do we call it, mobile protected firepower from the US and the Sprut from the Russians.
It's going to be really interesting because one thing certainly, Western, not just American, military procurement is really bad at is making hard choices between design requirements. We've had a scandal break this week about the new Australian so-called frigates, which are going to weigh over 10,000 tons, which is heavy cruiser territory.
Now, just like with the submarines, in about 5 years' time, when it all goes tits up, we'll be able to go back to John's article that he wrote this week for Cora and say, yeah, this guy John Griffiths knows how to write about naval procurement and who wants what and where it's going to go and how it's all going to fall down.
There is a link to the article on our Facebook page, but the point in that particular case is that they're trying to say, oh, we want an air warfare destroyer that can also hunt submarines, and they bought a British frigate design, and then they're jacking it up to heavy cruiser weight. And now they're realising that they can't generate enough electricity to run all the systems at the same time.
Which is strange, because at the same time we're talking about this, John, there's a Australia's great big ship landing.
Yeah, we sent an aircraft carrier to Tonga to aid in the tsunami, and we gave them COVID, and our aircraft carrier's broken down.
Yeah. And we can't fix it because we can't land the parts there, and Tonga after the
Tonga is now hosting our aircraft carrier.
Yeah, so after the volcano erupted in Tonga and wiped out all their communications and basically devastated the country, and we feel for you guys.
I don't think we have any Tongan listeners, but if we do, welcome.
Yeah, and look, looking forward to Moana Pacifica playing in the rugby championship.
I'm really looking forward to that. Oh, we have advertised on our Facebook. We are running a tipping comp for the Pacific Championship rugby. So if you've got thoughts on rugby and want to predict winners, then come join us. But, I realise that most of our listeners don't know what rugby is, and that's okay too.
Oh, no, it's getting a bit of a presence in the US and India.
Sure.
But the point being is that, yes, we have a rugby tipping cup, and you can come along. Feel free to take 5 minutes, take some wild guesses, because that's my name, and mad guesses, actually, on this tipping cup.
Anyway, so search, if you're not already on our social media, search for Totally Tanked. Twitter, Facebook, you'll find us. Our icon is a big leopard 2 looking right down the barrel.
But we have something else, besides Australian warship designs and failures, John, we have something else to talk about.
Well, hang on. What I was trying to say was simply that compromises are hard, and failed procurement often comes down to the fact that no one in charge was willing to make a choice between two things and instead waved their hands in the air and said, let's have both.
Polos
Yeah.
Why not both?
Yeah. Let's, before we go, talk a bit about Ukraine. We did predict that the Russians wouldn't invade in the winter, and we were correct. Hooray. I wouldn't say that makes us experts or geniuses. We could have been wrong.
Think of how much money we could have made on the market for that.
You think the sports betting is going to cover Russian invasions?
I think, there are a whole reason the Ukrainian president is saying, no, it's all going to be fine. It's basically in order to keep the economy going so that everybody keeps keeps investing in Russia, in Ukraine, rather than pulling the money out before the Russians come in.
This Western media hysteria about what is certainly no bigger a build-up than the Russian military exercises of 2020, which no one said anything about, is entirely because the Russians are also playing their part in bigging it up. Now, my personal theory is that Vladimir wants two things. He wants the sanctions off because they are hurting his
personal lifestyle?
His personal lifestyle, and all his wealthy Russian oligarch buddies aren't able to move their money around the world as easily as they could have before.
There is a rule for these sort of things of being put in place that basically really annoying them for their ability to buy property in central London and so forth.
Yeah, but flats in Belgravia are really difficult under these sanctions.
Yeah, and when you don't want to live in Moscow during winter,
or any time really.
Yeah, you'd much rather be going shopping on
Savile Row.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of it is the Russians want the sanctions off. Part of it is the Russians definitely want Crimea's status as being part of Russia normalised. And while I don't like the fact the Russians just invaded and took it, we have a reality which the chief of the German Navy just got sacked for saying everyone in Crimea, not everyone, most people in Crimea are Russian speakers and voted in a referendum to be part of Russia, and maybe we just need to accept that reality rather than trying to roll things back to 2014. Controversial, possibly, but something to think about in that the people who live there do actually want to be part of Russia, and how much conflict are we willing to have on that subject? Now, moving on to that, we then have, if Vladimir does decide to kick off a war, and we have a Winter Olympics going, which is always a time when the Russians like to start wars.
Well, yeah, it was the last day of the Winter Olympics when he went into Crimea, so the 24th of February 2014.
Yeah, but also the invasion of South Ossetia in the war with Georgia was also done while an Olympics was going on. Apparently, Vladimir just likes to send text messages from the stadium saying, roll them out, boys.
Maybe they should get some phone jammers in there.
Yeah,
around his booth.
Slow him down. Now, if you look at the map of Ukraine, you will see that the country's pretty much bisected by the Dnieper River. And that's a big river. Like, in parts, it's relatively river-like. In parts, it's like 10 kilometres wide. It does have quite a few bridges across it, but bridges don't last too long in warfare. And part of the thing with the Dnieper is there is actually a canal between the Dnieper and the Bug, and the Bug River runs into the Baltic, so you can actually move shipping from all the way from the Black Sea into the Baltic. Now, I do know, before anyone starts sending us messages, that canal is currently being refurbished and has been out of operations for a number of years, but It is being refurbished, so the strategic importance of that space is bigger than people might have thought. Anyway, but it's still a huge river. I don't think the Russians can...
Do you think that's going to roll into how the Turkish are looking to build a new channel through to the west of Constantinople to...
They want to get past the Montreux Convention.
Sorry, Istanbul. Not Constantinople.
No. Because the Montreux Convention covering the Bosphorus Straits wouldn't apply to that canal.
The new canal, which means that you can move warships from the Mediterranean through to the Black Sea and then through to the Baltic. So that's...
I don't think warships would fit in this canal.
Okay. Would under Russian control.
Yeah, we're probably talking the Dnieper Bug canal. We're talking, I think, 10,000 tons sort of vessels, which can cover a bunch of shipping containers, or some bulk, coal or grain or something like that. But that's the sort of thing we're talking about. And my bigger point is that the Russians probably won't be able to cross the Dnieper, but they could move up to the Dnieper, which would cause a huge amount of problems for the Ukrainians. And there is an issue that there are these free republics in the Donbass, like particularly the Donetsk People's Republic, that are full of Russian speakers, that have been autonomous since 2014. Certainly, going on 6 years now, which is quite a long time to live your own little lives in your autonomous republic.
Buddy, it's 8 years.
Yeah. Well, depending on which year you consider it's from. I'll get to Transnistria.
It just sounds like a Marvel Universe.
Yeah, it does.
Protectorate.
It does. But I would, South Ossetia is in that category too.
Yes.
My point is also that with these Russian-speaking free republics in the east of Ukraine, if Vladimir was to move Russian forces into these republics at their request, is that actually an invasion of Ukraine? Now, the Ukrainians would say, we've been invaded, NATO, come help us. And Joe Biden's already said he's not going to start a war over Ukraine, they're stuffed. Now, that's problematic as well, because Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, which it inherited at the end of the Soviet Union, on the basis that the Western powers guaranteed their borders. So we have walked away from those guarantees.
What a surprise.
Yeah, but to any country with nuclear weapons, it's like... These guys tell you they'll guarantee your borders.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's the whole reason North Korea is not going to give up its nukes, because they're going to say anybody who gives up their nukes gets invaded. So we're not giving up our nukes.
Yeah, well, you look at what happened to...
Afghanistan?
I was thinking Gaddafi.
Yeah.
Gaddafi got bayoneted up the arse in a sewage pipe. He's saying, geez, I really wish I'd hung on to my chemical weapons program.
Yeah.
So there's we've stuffed Ukraine. We've done horrible things to Ukraine. We the West. You and I
personally, John, haven't actually. Well, I haven't been there. You probably.
No, I haven't been to Ukraine.
There you go.
I've travelled through Russia, but no, I missed Ukraine, which is a shame. I'd love to go to Kiev. And apparently the Black Sea shore is quite delightful.
Not sure there's much surf there, though.
No, Black Sea's not a good surfing sea. Now there is an issue if you look at the map. If the Russians were to cut across the south of Ukraine, they could. There's a huge enclave of Russian speakers in Transnistria, which is the other side of the Dniester River. In
Moldova, in the eastern border of Moldova to Ukraine.
Yeah, and if the Russians were to cut across the top of the Black Sea, they would cut the Ukraine off from the sea lanes, which would be immensely harmful to Ukraine's economy. It would reclaim the ex-Soviet shipyards that the Russians have desperately been missing. For their navy, and it would possibly they could bring the Transnistrians into the Russian Republic. I don't think they're that ambitious, and I think eviscerating Ukraine to that extent might be a bridge too far for the rest of the world.
Not to mention if they do it now, they won't be able to threaten all this stuff and get some more economic relief in 2 years' time.
My thinking is that what they're doing is presenting credible threats so that they can get to the negotiating table and get Crimea normalised and get the sanctions lifted.
And possibly even Donetsk, they're starting the negotiations around that for the next Winter Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah. I could be wrong. I don't think anyone knows for sure, and I think Putin is keeping his options open. And this is why the prediction game falls apart, because you're dealing with a very hard-nosed man who has plans.
Now, I didn't know a lot about Ukraine before having a look at this sort of stuff, and did a tiny little bit, 5 minutes worth of research, but interesting facts came out to me. Okay, 41 million people there. All right,
It's a lot of people.
yeah, that's a lot of people. Bigger than Australia. 50,000 Koreans.
How'd they end up there?
Because during the Soviet Union, those people around the Korean areas that the Japanese were coming through, they said, right, we worry that you are a threat for the Japanese to be able to come through those areas into Russia or into the Soviet Union. So we're going to move you from there all around the other countries. So there's actually a large population of Koreans. The Koryo Saram, I apologize for the pronunciation there, spread around various Russian republics around the area. So, yes.
I would also say, if you're wondering why the North Koreans got so much better at rocketry and nuclear weapons in the last 10 years, it's largely because the Ukrainians, having been abandoned to Russian evisceration by the West, have been selling their rocketry and nuclear weapons, nuclear expertise to North Korea.
There you go.
Which also is like, oh, they're our friends. Well, no, they're not.
They're a market.
Ukraine is an incredibly complicated place, and I've said before in this podcast,
like Poland used to be a lot of the time, was stuck between two large organisations, and then suddenly, how do we survive in here?
Yeah, it is, and let's be honest that a large part of Ukrainian national identity, unfortunately, a bit like the Croatians, in that when the Nazis roll in saying, we're going to recognise you as real people, and you've been oppressed by this bigger power forever, you're like, yay, I'm on board with you guys, and turns out you backed the wrong horse. But that shouldn't be totally judgmentally applied to the fact that you were dealing with a bad hand, playing a bad hand.
Now, I was wondering whether or not there was a religious aspect to the division within Ukraine, but no, mostly Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and most of that is actually more religious in the West rather than the East, where the Russians are. So, yeah, again, I was thinking people might have gone one way or the other based on religious grounds. But
no, everyone's Orthodox around there. I mean,
but it was more atheist in the communist stronger communist areas, I guess, more Russian areas.
You do have the 3,000-year legacy of Greek colonization of the whole of the Black Sea, which
one day we'll get further into.
Oh, yeah. But not today.
Anyway, so yeah, look, it's Vlad, please don't invade. There's much more talking to be doing.
From a tank fan point of view, the big thing to see if it does go hot is because the Ukrainians were the builders of the advanced Russian tanks in the Soviet era. So they built the T60 series, they built particularly the T64, and they built the T80 series, which to a large extent the Russians said, this is very interesting what you've done with gas turbines and new turret designs, but we're going to go with the old KV2 engine in the T72.
Cheaper diesel.
The cheap diesel engine, the T72, and then we'll upgrade the T72 to the T90. And with the end of the Soviet Union and Ukraine being independent, aside from the rocketry and the nuclear technology and the shipyards, the Soviets all lost in Ukraine. And when you think about it that way, you can see why they're still so freaking steamed about the whole thing. There is also the fact that the factories that were making the more advanced, the elites, the Tank Guard Division tanks, were all in Ukraine, and these things are getting old now because the Soviet Union collapsed at the start of the 90s for God's sake. So just like us, it's all getting really old. But
If only they would build Matilda 2s, they could go all the way to the end.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's going to be very interesting if there is that conflict, and I think what we'll discover is that tanks aren't the sole determinant of what happens.
No.
But given Ukraine's inability to repel the loss of Crimea or the the Eastern republics, I don't have a lot of faith in their capacity to deal with a full-on regular onslaught, let alone.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Well, I mean, we hope it doesn't come to that, but we're here to hypothesize the things. Anyway, it would still be interesting to see how the 64s and the 80s acquit themselves. But yeah,
There you go.
cool. We've
Thank
hit
you, Tank
our
fans. We've been rambling on for quite a while.
we've hit our habitual limit of about an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah. And we'll be back in a month's time talking about a new tank. You'll have to wait and see what we're going for then.
What will it be?
But until then, will the real Black Panther still please stand up?
For everyone who's listened this far, quickly, to send us an email, the address is totestank@gmail.com. So TOTESTANKED
Yeah, because not everybody speaks Australian, so wouldn't know what totes mean.
Yeah. And of course, as I said, Facebook, Twitter, there are little interactions we have and things we do during the month that you're missing out on if you don't join up.
Especially beer for the Brumbies, which is the Ben Spoke.
Who we haven't reviewed yet, but we're going to have to at some point. Because I worked for them for 4 years. Ben Spoke, Australia's favourite IPA.
What we give to foreign leaders.
We do now, yeah. It's good. I literally went to work for the government because I knew they were going to make the best beer in the world, and it turns out it's really good.
I enjoy it.
But on that note, I think we're done, and we will be back. If you want to buy the t-shirts, redbubble.com, search for Totally Tanked, and just make sure you're buying it from the Totally Tanked account, not from any weirdo who's stealing our designs this month. But if it says,
we will hunt them down.
Yeah, if it says Totally Tanked as the seller, then that's us. And so please do buy t-shirts. We do get $3 or $4 on every shirt sold, and you get to have the t-shirt, and then we get to get our name out there with places that you're wearing the t-shirt. So this all works really nicely for everyone who wants to support the pod. And on that note, we are done.
Take care. Farewell.